Hello, Golfstat viewers. My name is Korky Kemp. I am the Eastern Director for College Golf Fellowship. Welcome back. We're in the middle of a three-part series on the top 10 questions people ask. As the 9 College Golf Fellowship staff members around the country, as we travel around, uh, oftentimes college students will ask similar questions, and so we have compiled the top 10 questions that people ask. Last week, we covered: is there a God? Is the Bible reliable? And what is my purpose in life? And this week, we're going to be covering how good do you have to be to go to heaven? What about other religions? And thirdly, um, what about those who have never heard? Now, obviously, these are huge questions. There could be entire, encyclopedias written about the answer to these questions. And so what we're going to present here is just a brief conversational answer as if we're sitting at a coffee shop and the topic comes up. So I encourage you all who are listening to maybe look further into these questions. I'll provide some resources where you can do that, whether it's books or videos. And always we have the CGF staff. You can find our contact information on the collegegolffellowship.com website that you're on right now, and we'd love to follow up with you. That's what we're here for. We've got plenty of time to help people with these questions. As I said last week, my prayer with this is that for those who are seeking, for those who are kicking the tires, pushing, pulling, trying to figure out these huge questions in life, um, that there's going to be some good information here that maybe will help gain some yardage in that process of looking up information and seeking um, issues about God. For the believer, this video is great because I know when I came to faith when I was a freshman at NC State, if I'd had a theological quiz of 100 questions right after I came to faith, I surely would have failed it. So there's tons of information that I didn't know, and along the way, these are some of the answers to some of the questions that I had, and they've helped me. And so now you guys are here, seeing some of the fruit of my investigation. And it's good to have logical, intellectual answers to the questions we all have, and it's also good to be able to conversationally share these answers with other people. So last week, thank you for some comments from some of you guys. Told me the quote that I got from Dr. Vodi Balcom, where the Dartmouth student, the teacher asked the Dartmouth student, why do they believe the Bible? And the student quoted Dr. Vodi Balcom, and the student said, I believe the Bible because it's a reliable collection of historical documents written down by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses that record supernatural events that took place in fulfillment of specific prophecy and claims to be divine rather than human in origin. That's why I believe the Bible. That's a great answer. If you guys want to guys or girls want to go about memorizing that, that's a good response. I think it might blow away people, but it also shows that you've taken the time to look into exactly what you believe, and you're not just believing it because mom or dad told you to, or because fill in the blank. So, with that, let's dive into the first question for today, which is going to be, how good do I have to be to go to heaven? So I played golf at NC State, as I mentioned, and as I was walking up in the conference tournament, the ACC tournament, I was a freshman. This tall player from Georgia Tech was a senior, and he was hitting these flop shots on a practice green, and he's hitting these flop shots and actually spinning the ball back up an incline, uphill, which kind of shocked me, overwhelmed me, and I thought to myself, I might be in the wrong conference. But this player was Stuart Sink. You all have heard of him. And when Stuart speaks, when he'll talk at different banquets, and he tells kind of his faith journey, he'll mention kind of the fruit of this. How good do I have to be to go to heaven? When he was at Georgia Tech, the college golf staff member was visiting Georgia Tech. It wasn't me. It was an older gentleman. And Stewart was asked a question by this CGF staff member: if you died tonight and stood before God, and God said, "Why should I let you into heaven?" what would you say? And Stewart references this question as a question that got him thinking about spiritual things, that caused him to seek, and ultimately he looked up information, ended up coming to faith. And so it's a huge question. How good do I have to be to go to heaven? I know for me, I heard that question at NC State, and the gentleman that answered that question for me um, provided a clear explanation of what's called the gospel, the good news, and it made a huge impact in my life. Um, One illustration that I think helps with that question is, let's say, for example, that you and I are on the beach in California, okay? And our goal is to swim to Hawaii. And how far we can swim is purely dependent upon how good a person we are, how many good works we've done, how much we've given to charity, uh, how much we have even walked in obedience to whatever rules of the faith system we believe in, whether it's the Ten Commandments or the Eightfold Path of Buddha or the Five Pillars of Islam, whatever. So how good we are, okay? So if we just want some reference points, we're at California, we're trying to swim to Hawaii, and in your mind right now, think of the worst person you can think of in the last 100 years. Okay? Who would that be? Some would say Hitler, some would say Mussolini. Uh, let's say Hitler. Okay? So Hitler's going to swim dependent, to Hawaii, depending on how many good works, how many good things he's done in his life. Okay? So Hitler backs up, starts running, beach of California, trips, falls, head down, 2 inches of water, boom, drowned. Not many good works, killed 6 million Jews. Not that good of a guy. Okay? Now think of who is the best person in the last 100 years that you know of. I know for me, when I hear that question, I'm thinking your mind, but for me, I think of Mother Teresa. She lived in India. She took care of poor people her entire life. Just, a saint. She basically gave up her life to care for others. Okay? And so she's going to start from the coast of California, swim to Hawaii. She got her wetsuit on, goes up, swims. She just starts pounding it 1 mile, 2 mile. Let's say she makes 50 miles, right? But here's the kicker. In order to get all the way to Hawaii, we've got to be 100% perfect. So even though Mother Teresa uh, was a phenomenal lady, okay, definitely a woman of God, she wasn't perfect. And to get to Hawaii, we've got to be perfect. Okay? So in the same sense, when we're answering this question, how good do I have to be to go to heaven? Naturally, it's logical to think, well, do we have to be 51% good, just a little bit better good than bad, and we go to heaven? Or is it like passing a test? You have to make a 70, minimum of 70% good, and you go to heaven. Or do you have to make an A? You have to get a 90 or a 92, rather, depending on whether you're a 10-point or 7-point scale. Now, do you have to be 93 percentile good, 93% good, and you go to heaven? Does the Bible answer that question? And so when I was sitting in college and I heard that question, the gentleman that asked it went through that question and pretty much dissected it. And so biblically, the standard is not 50%, it's not 70%, it's not 90%. Biblically, the standard is perfection. God says, "Be perfect as I am perfect." Okay? And then the gentleman in college, he started walking us through these verses. He walked us through what's called the Romans Road. Romans 3:23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So nobody's perfect. We're all sinful. And the next verse was Romans 6:23, which says the wages of sin is death. So not only are we all sinful and fall short, but there's a penalty to pay. And that penalty being, and that penalty being the penalty for sin being death, separation from God. Okay, so we're all in the same boat. Hitler, Mother Teresa, you, me, nobody's perfect. And so, did God leave us in that situation? That's where Romans 5:8 says, "But God demonstrates His own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, He sent His Son to die for us." Excuse me. So while each of us has said, forget you, God, I want to live my life. I want to be the captain of my own ship. I want to be the master of my own soul. While we've all said, forget you, God, I want to be my own God. I want to live how I want to live. God sends His Son to die for us. So therefore, we ask ourselves, well, does that mean that everybody goes to heaven? Does that mean everybody knows God? And Romans 10:9 says, If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So not only did God do that, but the decision ultimately, people have to individually believe. You don't inherit faith or inherit eternal life just because your parents believed, or maybe your dad's uncle was a pastor somewhere. That it's an individual decision. We have to confess with our mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. So a great book that dives into this question a little bit deeper by an author named Andy Stanley, and the book is titled "Since Nobody's Perfect, How Good is Good Enough?" And so a lot of times when people think about religion, they just think, oh, it's a bunch of rules, and if you follow the rules well, then you get rewarded. But biblical Christianity is all about God's standards of perfection. We fall short. We can't save ourselves, and so we have to come to faith in somebody who was perfect to forgive our sins. And so when we answer that question, if we died tonight, stood before God, and God says, "Why should I let you into heaven?" The wrong answer is going to be, "Here, God, here's my resume. I've been a good boy. I've been a good girl. I think I'm good enough to go in." No. The correct answer would be, well, one, I don't deserve it, but two, I've come to faith in your Son, and I believe in him, and only by him can I stand before you as innocent, because otherwise I'm guilty. So that's a great question that people ask, and that is one that the staff at CGF would love to follow up with you in regards to that question. Number two, moving right along. So what about other religions? So naturally, when we hear how good you have to be to go to heaven, then the next question that comes to mind is what about other religions? There's 5 major world religions. There's 10,500 um, you know various sects or various different groups, various religions. Which one of them is right? And so that's a great question. It's a question I've had and a question that I've looked into. And when we look at all these different world religions, a lot of them will be pretty similar. And maybe even you all have heard things like, well, all religions are the same, and they all are like paths going up a mountain. And they're different paths, but they all go up the same mountain to the same God. And so that's a common thought today. And when we look at religions, a lot of them do have, similar rules, you could say. Don't kill, rape is wrong, child abuse is wrong. So they're going to have a lot of similarities. Now, if you look at, say, as I mentioned before, Buddhism, there's the Eightfold Path of Buddha. If you obey that, then hopefully you're reincarnated as something better. If you live a bad life in Buddhism or Hinduism, then you come back as maybe an animal or a lower person in society. Okay, so that's what they would believe. Islam, the guys that flew the planes and the Twin Towers on 9/11, they thought that upon their death they were going to receive 31 virgins for killing the infidel. Okay, that with the way they read the Quran was that they were doing a good thing by killing people that were not Muslim. Okay, and so they obviously fully believed that and were willing to give their life up for that. But does that make it true? Just because someone fully believes something and acts accordingly doesn't make it true. Let's say, for example, there's a father and a son in the Middle East, and from day one, the father walks his son up to the top of the mountain. He says, "Son, your life is all about killing these people across the border, is all about killing this other people group." And the father trains him in that, and he is educated in that. And when the boy is 21 years old, he straps a bomb to himself. He crosses that border, goes into a coffee shop, and boom, takes out 10 of them. Okay? He lived out his calling according to his dad. Okay? Is that boy, the 21-year-old, is he held accountable? I mean, was he right in what he did? Is there truth, or is it all relative? Is there any absolute? These are great questions, especially when we're talking about issues of faith, where if heaven is real and there is a God, these are the biggest questions we have in life. And so, in looking into it, I found out that there's around 10,500 world religions. Okay, and 10,499 of them are going to be works performance-based religion. You do this, this, and this, and you get that. Okay, so it's kind of like God's here, man's here, and we can earn our way, boom, 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 to God. Okay, so the guys on 9/11, they thought they were earning their way, boom. Okay, Hindus, Buddhists, and I'm not picking on any religion. I'm just saying, if you name the religion and there is some performance-based standard where you can earn your way to whatever the heaven is like, or whatever the good is like. Okay, the only one that is not a works or performance-based religion is biblical Christianity. Okay, biblical Christianity says God's perfect, we're sinful, and we cannot earn our way. And there's even Christian groups that would fall outside of biblical Christianity that say God's about you obey the Ten Commandments, and if you obey them well, then you get rewarded with heaven. Good people go to heaven, bad people go to hell. But that statement right there, even though there's some groups that would call themselves Christian, that statement is not biblical. The fact of the matter is, the Bible talks about God gives the Ten Commandments not, well, partly, yes, to show people how God wants you to live, but even more so to show you us that we fall short of God's standard, that we are guilty. Okay? And so when Jesus is talking in Matthew 5, he says, not only does the Ten Commandments say, do not commit murder, but Jesus says, if you look at your brother and say he's a fool, basically if you hate your brother, then you're guilty of murder. Jesus' word. Jesus said, not only do the Ten Commandments say do not commit murder, but I tell you, if you look at a woman with lust in your eyes, you're guilty of adultery. Okay? So if thoughts can be sins, we apply that to all the Ten Commandments in God's law. It's not God's good, God's perfect, and I'm pretty good. It's night and day, right? And so the only way that we as simple people can know God is through faith. And so what about all the other religions? I definitely think that we should have religious tolerance. Tolerance is a huge thing. I believe in legal tolerance. People should legally have the same rights. Okay, and even no matter what faith you are, it says that we are made in the image of God. And I think there's dignity and value in every human being, whether they've been born or they're in the womb. I think you name it, human beings are God's artistic masterpiece. Okay, we are His top creation, and so there is great value in human life. And so we should all have the same rights in the sense of legal tolerance. I think social tolerance, we should have social tolerance. We should treat people with dignity and respect no matter what they believe, no matter how they live. Okay? We should have legal and social tolerance. That's a good thing. And that's one of the beauties of America. You can believe what you want to believe, and you're not going to get your head cut off. You're not going to be put in prison. So that's a good thing. But then we get to intellectual tolerance. Okay? And so intellectually, somebody in America, you name it, somebody could be racist. Okay, they could think that their race is superior to others, and they could look down on other races, and they have the right to believe that. Okay, but with intellectual tolerance, there's going to be truth, and just because they have the right to believe that doesn't make it right. Okay, if I run across somebody who's racist and they're presenting these ideas to me, I say you have the right to believe that legally. You're not going to be arrested for that. I'm going to treat you the same. I'm going to treat you with dignity and respect. But that belief is wrong. Okay? If the same person says, I believe fully with my heart 2 plus 2 equals 5. I'll be like, you have the right to believe that, but that belief is wrong and there's truth. 2 plus 2 equals 4. And so I think on issues that of intellectual tolerance, I think that there needs to be truth and that there is absolute truth. Okay? And from what our last week's study, is the Bible reliable? I think what the Bible presents, what the Bible speaks, what is written in the Bible is absolute truth. Even though in our culture that thought's not popular. Our culture would say truth is relative. So one person could say this sweater that I'm wearing is green, and one person could say this sweater that I'm wearing is purple, and you're both right. Nobody's wrong, you're both right. And that's kind of what our society presents. But logically, it really doesn't make any sense. Okay? The sweater is either green or it's purple, but it can't be both. Okay? In the same sense, with when you're looking at different religions, okay, all these religions are going to differ on who God is, what the afterlife is like, and the eternal destiny. Okay? So basically, and another way to say it, they're all going to differ on origin of life, morality, meaning, and destiny. Okay? And so one law of logic is the law of non-contradiction. which says two opposing statements within the same realm of topic or realm of consideration cannot both be true. One would have to be false, one would have to be true, or they're both false, but they can't both be true. So if we look at that with as far as religions go, in Islam, heaven is presented as a sensual place, maybe where you get virgins or whatnot. Okay, and then in the Christian heaven, that would definitely not be true. So just with those right there, you can't have the law of non-contradiction. Law of non-contradiction would say either they're both wrong or one's right and one's wrong, but they can't both be right. So you apply that to all of these various world religions, and either they're all wrong or one's right and the rest are wrong, and that's truth. And so I think that's a great topic to look into. C.S. Lewis, there's a good video on YouTube called C.S. Lewis, Lord, Liar, or Lunatic. And in this video, he presents the thought that all these other world religions, they'll look at Jesus and say he's a great preacher, he's a great prophet, he's a very enlightened person. But C.S. Lewis says Jesus' life, what he said, how he lived, disqualifies that statement. So Jesus said he is God, okay, and that's why they killed him ultimately, because he said he was God. So everybody knew that he said that. He said he is the only way to God. John 14:6 says, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so he claimed to be God, and he claimed to be the only way to God. Okay? So, one, either Jesus was right, and it's true, and he is the only way to God, and therefore he'd be Lord. Two, he straight lied about it, and he was lying that he was God, he's lying he's the only way to God, which would make him a liar, which would disqualify him as being a good teacher or an enlightened person, whatever. Or three, he was absolutely crazy. He was a wild man. He was psychotic, that he thought he was God, and that he lived like that even though he wasn't. So Jesus is either Lord, liar, or lunatic, but you can't call him a good teacher, because what he said about who he was, why he was here, how he lived, you have to put him in one of those categories. And so these other religions will call Jesus some prophet, but really, logically, you can't do that. So what about all the other religions? I think God desires for all people to know him. God desires for people to be in a relationship with him. God gave his most prized possession, his son, to live, die, rise again, so that sinful people can be made right with a holy God. And so God's heart is for all people to come to faith. Which leads us to our last question, which would be, what about those who have never heard? Okay, so we've covered how good do you have to be to go to heaven. We've covered what about other religions? And then a great question that people ask, a question that I asked that I had to do some research because the answer really mattered to me, was what about those who've never heard? Will God judge those who have never heard? And so let's say there's an African tribesman who grows up, and what chance does he have about hearing about God, hearing about the Bible, hearing about Jesus? Or does he have no chance at all? And so when we go to Scripture, we look at Psalm 19, which says, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Okay, so there's some form of external revelation that people have just through living life. You look at the sun, moon, and stars, and you know there's a creator. Romans 1:20 says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. So with this question, we have external revelation in the sense of everyone who's ever lived sees nature, sees sun, moon, and stars, and knows there's God, and is held accountable for that. Okay? The second point with this question, what about those who've never heard, is that God also gives an internal revelation. Okay? Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, God has set eternity in the hearts of men. Another one, Romans 2:15, since they show that the requirements of the law are written on their heart. Okay? So God gives each of us a moral compass Whether we grow up in Africa, America, New Guinea, you name it, God gives us a moral compass. So I would say even the African cannibal who grew up eating other people, okay, and that's what their tribe does, and they eat other people. There's a day in that African tribesman's life that he's probably chomping on somebody's calf bone and thinks, this may not be right. I'm not sure if we should be eating people. Okay? And so God has this moral compass on each of our hearts. And I think that's partly where all these various religions get a lot of the same mores and values and rules and regulations and whatnot. So one, God gives us an external revelation. If you live life, you know there's God. Two, he gives us a moral compass, an internal revelation of himself, and that there's a law on our hearts. And if we're honest with ourselves and the African tribesman, if he was honest with himself, maybe he's pulling, maybe the African tribesman kills a deer, he's pulling it back, and somebody comes and boom, bonks him on his head, steals the deer. He says that's wrong. Where does he get that from? That's wrong. And we all would say that's wrong as well. Where does that come from? I think that's the moral compass on our heart. So if we were to record every statement that we make about what's right and wrong in our lifetime, and if the African tribesmen were to do the same, even we don't live up to our own standards. There are things that I say are wrong that I don't like about other people that I do. Okay? There might be, I look at somebody who's very prideful and I'm like, man, they are proud and arrogant. And guess what? I've been proud and arrogant and I don't like it. The African tribesman, you record things that he says during his life, and even he doesn't live up to his own standard. And so everybody who's ever lived has this knowledge of God through creation, through nature, and they have this knowledge of this moral code on their hearts that even they don't meet. And so there's a knowledge of God and there's a knowledge of conviction or guilt in that. And then biblically, Old Testament and New Testament, in answering the question, what about those who've never heard? Guaranteed 100%, God promises, and you can take this promise to the bank, he promises, seek and you'll find, knock and the door will be answered. Okay? Ask and you shall receive. And so over and over God says, for those who seek me, they will find me if they seek me with all their heart. It says that in Jeremiah 29. And so we see this God that knows every person on this earth, knows every hair on their head, desires to be in a relationship with them, made a way for them to be in a relationship with him, and knows everybody's thoughts, knows everybody's words. If somebody seeks God, 100% guaranteed, God's going to find a way to get that message to that person so that they will find God. And there's been all kinds of examples, true hardcore examples. For example, in one Muslim community, there was over 200 people, 200 Muslims that had this same dream of being in the desert, a man with a white robe, a face shining like the sun, and it's Jesus basically saying, come, seek after me. And these men seek, ultimately, come to faith in Christ. That's one documented 200 people in one Muslim community. There was a South American tribesman. Okay, he was the king of the tribe, and he had these false wooden idols that he set up on top of the hill. And whenever the rains came, whenever the winds came, these false idols would fall down. Okay, and true story, he keeps setting them up. They fall down. Finally, he's like, would the real God show himself to me? And so what happens is these Portuguese missionaries in South America are flying over, and they drop some literature to this people group, this tribe they'd never seen. The king gets this literature, goes to the nearest trading post where they speak both Portuguese and the tribesman's language. Here's the message of the gospel. Goes back, tells the tribe. The tribe comes to faith. Missionaries get there months later and find a whole tribe that's never been physically touched that are believers. And so 100% guaranteed, seek and you will find. But when I hear about things like this, and what about those who've never heard, I'm also reminded and I'm convicted that when Jesus first started his public ministry, he said, follow me and I'll make you, what did he say? Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. The last thing Jesus says before he goes to be with God in heaven is the Great Commission. Go into all the earth and make disciples. Okay, so if it's the first thing he said and the last thing he said, to go and to impact those around you, share the love of Christ, share the message of the gospel with those around you, then it's an important thing according to Jesus. And so when I look at the world, and I look at my life, and I want to be faithful to God's word. And so that's partly why we at College Golf Fellowship, that's why we do what we do, because we've experienced this love from God. We want to share it with others. And so I compare it to if you were to find the cure for cancer, and you find the cure for cancer, you got the recipe, you got the blueprint, you bury it in your backyard, and don't tell anybody. Is that a good or a bad thing? Obviously, that'd be a bad thing. What if you told people the cure for cancer? Literally, you could save millions. In the same sense, when you find the cure for the eternal cancer, that because of sin, we all fall short of God's standard, and there's a penalty to be paid. We all have basically this eternal cancer. When we find that cure, do we go bury that recipe in our backyard? Don't tell anybody? No, we want to tell the world. Why? Because literally it could save millions. And so this question, what about those who've never heard? It really fires me up in the sense of, well, people need to hear, and God uses us to accomplish His plans. And so it's a privilege to go and to share basically the greatest news that I've ever heard, the greatest news of this earth. You know, I could give somebody $1,000,000 if I had it, and they'd think I was great. But if I share this message and they come to faith, we're talking about an eternal impact here. There's nothing better. So, in review, top 10 questions people ask. We have just covered how good do you have to be to go to heaven? What about other religions? And what about those who have never heard? Now, obviously, these are huge questions again. I encourage you all to seek truth and seek it with all your heart, and God will provide that to you. We're here for you. There's some great books. Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ, is a phenomenal book that answers a lot of these questions. He's also got a book called The Case for Faith. Lee's a sharp guy, went to Yale Law School, worked for the Chicago Tribune. He tried to disprove Christianity and ultimately ended up coming to faith. He's got a movie. You can rent it at Redbox. Lee Strobel. So we're here for you as the Golfstat community. Thanks again for joining us. And anything we can do at College Golf Fellowship, we would be honored to do. So email us, call us. Again, my name is Korky Kemp, korky.kemp@gmail.com. We're here for you. And I encourage you to continue to seek God. And if you seek Him, 100% promise, you'll find Him. And for people that have come to faith, that are wanting to grow, these are great questions to get knowledgeable about answering. And the Word says always have a ready answer for those who ask for the hope that you have. So we always want to have belief and knowledge behind why we live like we do, why we believe as we do. So thanks again, and I wish you well this week in college golf, in your tournaments, and in practice. And just keep on pursuing God, and it's a wild ride, but you'll never regret it. Korky Kemp from College Golf Fellowship signing off.